Marcus Williams had always known his stepfather, Detective Ray Hoffman, was a control freak, but nothing prepared him for what happened on that Tuesday morning in March. At 28, Marcus had carefully compartmentalized his military career from his family life, especially since his mother remarried when he was 16. Ray had always treated him like a delinquent kid who needed constant supervision, despite Marcus's impeccable record and advanced degrees. The trouble started when Marcus returned home to Arlington for his mother's birthday weekend. He'd taken leave from his position at the Pentagon, something he rarely did, but family came first. His mother, Eleanor, had been battling cancer, and these moments felt precious. Ray, however, seemed determined to make the visit miserable from the moment Marcus walked through the door. Still playing soldier boy, Ray had sneered over dinner, his badge deliberately visible on his belt even though he was off duty. Marcus had bitten his tongue, focusing instead on his mother's weak smile across the table. She'd lost so much weight, her wedding ring sliding around her finger like a loose bracelet. The next morning, Marcus was in the backyard taking an important call from General Patricia Hayes regarding a classified operation when Ray stormed out, face red with fury. Marcus held up a finger, indicating he needed a moment to finish the call, but Ray was having none of it. "I don't care who you think you're talking to," Ray snarled, grabbing Marcus's wrist. "You're being disrespectful to your mother by conducting business during family time." Before Marcus could protest, Ray had slapped handcuffs on him, the metal biting into his wrists. "Ray, what are you doing?" Eleanor's horrified voice came from the kitchen window, but her husband was already dragging Marcus toward his police cruiser parked in the driveway. "Teaching your son some respect," Ray called back, his voice carrying the smug satisfaction of someone who finally had the upper hand. "He thinks he's too good for this family, always with his mysterious phone calls and important meetings." Marcus remained calm, though his jaw tightened. On the other end of the still-connected call, General Hayes had heard everything. "Major Williams, are you in distress?" Her voice crackled through the phone's speaker. "Just a family misunderstanding, ma'am," Marcus replied evenly, even as Ray shoved him against the car. "I'll call you back." But Ray had heard enough. His face went pale as he processed the military terminology and the obvious authority in the woman's voice. "Major," he repeated, uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. Marcus looked at his stepfather with steady brown eyes. "Yes, Ray, Major Marcus Williams, United States Army. And you just assaulted a federal officer during an official Pentagon briefing." The color drained completely from Ray's face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake, but it was already too late. The consequences were already in motion. Within minutes of the call ending, Marcus could hear the rumble of engines approaching. Ray was still processing what Marcus had revealed. his grip on the handcuff keys trembling slightly. Eleanor had come outside, her face etched with confusion and growing alarm as she took in the scene. "Marcus, what's happening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The cancer treatments had weakened her, but her maternal instincts were still sharp. She could sense the tension crackling between the two men like electricity before a storm. "Ray made a mistake, Mom," Marcus said gently, never taking his eyes off his stepfather. "A big one." The first black SUV rounded the corner, followed by four others in perfect formation. Ray's face went from pale to ashen as he watched the convoy approach. These weren't local police vehicles or even FBI. The license plates were government-issued, and the men stepping out wore the kind of serious expressions that suggested this wasn't a social call. "Oh God," Ray whispered, finally understanding the gravity of his situation. His hand shook as he reached for the handcuff keys, but Marcus shook his head. "Too late for that now," Marcus said calmly. "You wanted to play law enforcement. Well, now you get to meet the real deal." The lead agent approached with measured steps, his identification already visible. "Agent David Morrison, Military Police. We received reports of an assault on a federal officer." His eyes swept the scene, taking in the handcuffs, Ray's uniform, and Eleanor's frightened expression. "This is my stepfather, Detective Ray Hoffman," Marcus explained professionally. "He placed me under arrest while I was conducting official Pentagon business. The entire incident was overheard by General Hayes during our classified briefing." Agent Morrison nodded grimly and turned to Ray, whose police training had completely abandoned him. "Detective Hoffman, you're under federal investigation for assault on a military officer, interference with national security operations, and abuse of local law enforcement authority." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ray, what have you done?" But Ray couldn't answer. He was staring at the growing crowd of federal agents, each one representing a level of authority he'd never encountered. His local detective badge, which he'd wielded like a weapon against Marcus for years, suddenly seemed like a toy compared to the real power surrounding him. "Sir," Agent Morrison addressed Marcus respectfully, "do you require medical attention? We have a medic on standby." "I'm fine, Agent Morrison. Just get these cuffs off me so I can properly debrief General Hayes on the security breach." Marcus's tone was crisp and professional, a stark contrast to the man Ray thought he knew. As the handcuffs clicked open, Marcus rubbed his wrists and straightened his shoulders, his military bearing becoming apparent for the first time in Ray's presence. Eleanor watched in amazement as her son transformed from the quiet, respectful boy Ray had always bullied into someone she barely recognized, someone with unmistakable authority. "Mom, I need you to go inside," Marcus said gently but firmly. "This is going to get complicated, and you don't need the stress." Eleanor nodded mutely, casting one last bewildered look at Ray before disappearing into the house. Agent Morrison was already on his radio, coordinating with headquarters while his team secured the perimeter. Ray stood frozen, watching his world crumble around him. The neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual sight of federal vehicles in their quiet suburban street. "Detective Hoffman," Agent Morrison continued, his voice professional but cold, "you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a military tribunal and civilian court." "Military tribunal," Ray's voice cracked. "But I'm a civilian police officer. This is a domestic issue." Marcus stepped forward, his demeanor completely changed from the accommodating stepson Ray had always known. "Ray, you assaulted a major in the United States Army during the execution of his duties. You interfered with national security operations. This stopped being a domestic issue the moment you put those handcuffs on me." The weight of realization hit Ray like a physical blow. For 12 years, he'd treated Marcus like an irresponsible kid, dismissing his military service as playing dress-up. He'd never bothered to ask about Marcus's actual rank or responsibilities, assuming he was just another grunt with delusions of grandeur. But you never said," Ray stammered. "You never asked," Marcus replied simply. "You just assumed. Every time I tried to tell you about my work, you'd make jokes about toy soldiers and weekend warriors. Every time Mom wanted to talk about my promotions, you'd change the subject." Agent Morrison gestured to his team, and 2 agents moved to flank Ray. "Detective, we need you to come with us for questioning. You'll want to contact a lawyer immediately." Ray's neighbors watched in stunned silence as the man who'd always portrayed himself as the neighborhood's unofficial authority figure was led away by federal agents. Mrs. Patterson from next door had her phone out, undoubtedly already spreading the news through their community. "Marcus," Ray called out desperately as the agents guided him toward one of the SUVs. "Tell them this was just a misunderstanding. Family drama. Tell them I didn't know." Marcus looked at his stepfather with an expression that was neither cruel nor kind, simply professional. "Ignorance isn't a defense, Ray. You're a law enforcement officer. You should know that better than anyone." After Ray was driven away, Agent Morrison approached Marcus with a tablet in hand. "Major Williams, we need a full statement regarding the incident. General Hayes has also requested an immediate secure call to assess any potential security compromises." Marcus nodded, glancing toward the house where his mother's silhouette was visible in the window. "Agent Morrison, my mother is battling cancer. This situation is going to be extremely difficult for her. Is there any way we can handle the preliminary matters here rather than requiring her to travel? Of course, sir. We can set up a temporary command post in one of the vehicles. Your mother's health takes priority. Morrison's respectful tone wasn't lost on the remaining neighbors, who were beginning to understand that Marcus wasn't the person they'd thought he was. As they walked toward the lead SUV, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his younger sister Jessica, who lived across the country. Mom just called crying about Ray being arrested by federal agents. What's going on? Marcus typed back quickly. Long story. Ray made a serious mistake. I'll explain everything later. Just know that Mom is safe and this will all work out. Inside the SUV, Agent Morrison activated a secure communication system that would have impressed Ray under different circumstances. Within moments, General Hayes's voice filled the vehicle. Major Williams, are you secure? Yes, ma'am. Agent Morrison has established a clean connection. Good. I need a full briefing on what occurred and your assessment of any security implications. The Joint Chiefs are concerned about the breach of operational security. Marcus spent the next 20 minutes providing a detailed account of the morning's events, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the personal nature of the situation. General Hayes asked pointed questions about Ray's knowledge of Marcus's work and whether any classified information might have been compromised. Sir, Detective Hoffman has never shown interest in my military service beyond occasional derogatory comments. He's never asked about my assignments, clearance level, or duties. I've maintained strict operational security within my family environment. Understood, Major. However, his actions today demonstrate a concerning disregard for federal authority and military operations. The investigation will proceed accordingly. When the call ended, Agent Morrison reviewed his notes with Marcus. The scope of Ray's potential charges was extensive: assault on a federal officer, interference with military operations, abuse of authority, and potentially additional charges depending on the investigation's findings. Major, I have to ask, why didn't you identify yourself immediately when Detective Hoffman attempted to detain you? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Agent Morrison, I've been dealing with Ray's intimidation tactics for 12 years. I kept hoping he'd realize his mistake and back down. I never imagined he'd actually follow through with arresting me during an official call. Eleanor was waiting in the living room when Marcus returned to the house, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The federal agents had departed except for one security detail that would remain until the situation was fully resolved. Marcus, please tell me what's really happening, she said, her voice small and frightened. Ray said you were just in the Army Reserves, maybe a sergeant or something, but those men, they treated you like a senior officer, Marcus finished gently, settling beside his mother on the couch. Mom, I'm a major in the United States Army. I work at the Pentagon in strategic operations. I have top secret clearance and report directly to some of the highest-ranking officials in our military. Eleanor stared at her son as if seeing him for the first time. But Ray always said, he made it sound like you were barely more than a weekend warrior. Ray never asked about my actual rank or duties. Every time you tried to share my promotions or achievements, he'd dismiss them or change the subject. I stopped trying to correct him years ago because it caused arguments, and I didn't want to upset you. The truth of Marcus's words hit Eleanor like a wave. She remembered countless dinners where she tried to share news about Marcus's military career, only to have Ray interrupt with sarcastic comments or dismissive jokes. She'd gradually stopped mentioning Marcus's accomplishments to keep peace in the house. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I should have stood up to him. I should have made him listen." Marcus took his mother's hands in his. "Mom, you were fighting cancer. You didn't need the additional stress of our conflict. I made the choice to keep the peace for your sake." But now Ray's in serious trouble because of his ignorance, Eleanor said, the reality sinking in. What's going to happen to him? Marcus chose his words carefully. He'll face federal charges. The exact penalties will depend on the investigation and how the military tribunal proceeds. But Mom, he assaulted a federal officer during the execution of official duties. The consequences are severe. Eleanor covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by the cascade of revelations and their implications. Her husband of 12 years, the man she'd trusted to be a father figure to her son, had revealed himself to be something entirely different than she'd believed. "There's something else," Marcus said gently. "The media will probably pick up this story. A local detective assaulting a Pentagon officer during a classified briefing. It's going to attract attention." Eleanor looked up sharply. "The media?" "I'll do everything I can to protect your privacy. But Ray's actions have made this a matter of public interest." By evening, Marcus's prediction proved accurate. The local news had picked up the story, though the details were initially limited due to the ongoing federal investigation. The headline read, "Local detective arrested for assaulting military officer during Pentagon call." Jessica had driven through the night from Denver, arriving just as the news report aired. She burst through the front door, immediately wrapping their mother in a fierce hug before turning to Marcus with wide eyes. "Are you actually a major?" she asked incredulously. "When Ray used to make those jokes about you playing soldier, I thought maybe you were exaggerating your rank to annoy him." Marcus showed her his military identification and some of the commendations he'd received over the years, documents their mother had kept proudly despite Ray's dismissive attitude. Jessica read through them with growing amazement. "Marcus, you have a Bronze Star," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You've been deployed to classified locations. You've been personally commended by generals. How did we not know any of this?" "You did know," Eleanor said quietly from the couch. "I tried to tell both of you about Marcus's achievements over the years, but Ray would always minimize them or make jokes, and eventually I stopped bringing it up because it caused tension." The three family members sat in contemplative silence, processing how Ray's behavior had systematically undermined Marcus's accomplishments and prevented his own family from understanding his true role in the military. Marcus's secure phone buzzed with another call from the Pentagon. "I need to take this," he said, stepping into the kitchen for privacy. "Major Williams, this is Colonel Thompson from Military Police Command. We've completed the preliminary investigation into Detective Hoffman's background. There are some concerning patterns we need to discuss." "What kind of patterns, sir?" "Hoffman has a history of complaints regarding excessive force and abuse of authority. 3 formal complaints in the past 5 years, all involving individuals he perceived as challenging his authority. The local department has been protecting him due to his arrest record and political connections." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Sir, are you saying this wasn't an isolated incident?" "Not by a long shot, Major. Detective Hoffman appears to have a pattern of using his badge to intimidate and control people, particularly those he views as threats to his authority. Your case just happened to involve someone with the resources and legal protection to fight back." The implications were staggering. Ray hadn't just made a mistake with Marcus. He'd been systematically abusing his power for years, and the local police department had been covering for him. The next morning brought a parade of federal investigators, military officials, and eventually, media representatives to the Williams family home. Marcus had arranged for his mother and sister to stay at a hotel to avoid the chaos, but he remained to handle the official proceedings. Agent Morrison returned with a team of investigators who needed to document the scene and gather additional evidence. They photographed the handcuffs, the area where Marcus had been detained, and took detailed measurements of the property. "Major Williams," Agent Morrison said as they reviewed the evidence, "we've uncovered additional information about Detective Hoffman's history. This case has opened up a much larger investigation into his conduct and the local department's oversight failures." Marcus wasn't surprised. The more he thought about Ray's behavior over the years, the more he recognized the signs of someone who'd been getting away with abuse of authority for a long time. Ray's confidence in handcuffing Marcus, his dismissive attitude toward military service, his need to constantly assert dominance. It all painted a picture of someone drunk on power. "What does this mean for the current charges?" Marcus asked. "The charges against him will likely be enhanced due to the pattern of behavior. The federal prosecutors are considering this a civil rights violation under color of authority, which carries significant penalties." Marcus's phone rang with a call from General Hayes. "Major, I wanted to inform you that this incident has reached the highest levels of military command. The Secretary of Defense is personally monitoring the case due to the implications for military-civilian relations and operational security." "Ma'am, I appreciate the support, but I want to ensure this doesn't negatively impact my career or my family's privacy." "Major Williams, you handled this situation with exemplary professionalism under extremely difficult circumstances. Your career is not only protected, but likely to be enhanced by your conduct during this incident. As for privacy, we're working with media relations to ensure your family's personal information remains protected." After ending the call, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. Ray had spent 12 years trying to diminish Marcus's military service, only to inadvertently expose his own career to federal scrutiny and likely termination. His mother called from the hotel, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Marcus, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I need to apologize to you for not standing up to Ray's behavior over the years. I let him minimize your achievements because I was afraid of conflict, especially while dealing with cancer treatments." "Mom, you don't need to apologize. You were dealing with a life-threatening illness while trying to maintain a marriage. I understood the impossible position you were in. But I should have been proud of you publicly. I should have celebrated your accomplishments instead of hiding them to keep Ray comfortable." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Ray's troubles multiplied daily as the investigation expanded. 3 more victims of his previous misconduct came forward, encouraged by the news coverage of his federal arrest. Marcus was reviewing case documents in the hotel conference room they'd rented when his military attorney, Captain Sarah Mitchell, arrived with updates from the prosecutor's office. "Major Williams, Detective Hoffman's legal situation has deteriorated significantly. The additional misconduct allegations have prompted the district attorney to launch a separate investigation into potential criminal charges for his previous actions." "What about his current employment status?" "He's been suspended without pay pending the federal investigation. The local police department is distancing themselves from him as quickly as possible. They're claiming they were unaware of his pattern of behavior, though our investigation suggests otherwise. Marcus nodded grimly. Captain Mitchell, I want to make something clear. While I want justice for his actions against me and the other victims, I'm concerned about my mother's emotional well-being. She's been married to this man for 12 years and is currently battling cancer. Understood, sir. We'll work with victim services to ensure your family has access to appropriate counseling and support resources. That evening, Marcus, Alina, and Jessica sat together in the hotel restaurant, finally able to have an honest conversation about the years of Ray's manipulative behavior. Alina was gradually recognizing the signs she'd missed or rationalized away. He always needed to be the most important person in every situation, Alina realized aloud. When you'd call with news about promotions or assignments, he'd immediately change the subject to talk about his latest arrest or case. And he'd make those jokes about military service, Jessica added, but they weren't really jokes. They were designed to make Marcus seem less impressive. Marcus nodded. That's a classic manipulation tactic, a systematic minimization of others' achievements to maintain psychological dominance. I recognized it, but I chose to tolerate it rather than cause problems for Mom. Alina reached across the table to take Marcus's hand. From now on, I want to hear about everything. Your work, your assignments, your achievements, all of it. I want to be the proud military mother I should have been all along. The moment was interrupted by Captain Mitchell's arrival at their table, her expression serious. Major Williams, I apologize for interrupting, but there's been a significant development. Detective Hoffman has been offered a plea agreement by the federal prosecutors. The plea agreement terms were comprehensive and severe. Ray would face immediate termination from law enforcement, permanent prohibition from carrying firearms, substantial fines, probation, mandatory anger management counseling, and community service. Most importantly, he would be required to publicly acknowledge his misconduct and apologize to his victims. He's agreed to these terms, Marcus asked Captain Mitchell in disbelief. His attorney strongly advised acceptance. The alternative was facing federal trial on multiple felony counts with potential prison time. This agreement allows him to avoid incarceration, but essentially ends his law enforcement career permanently. Alina was quiet during the explanation, processing the reality that her husband's career and reputation were completely destroyed. Despite everything that had happened, she felt a complex mix of relief and sadness. "What happens next?" she asked. "There will be a formal sentencing hearing where Detective Hoffman will publicly enter his plea and make statements acknowledging his misconduct. The judge will then formally impose the agreed-upon penalties. Marcus looked at his mother with concern. "Mom, you don't have to attend the hearing if it's too difficult." "No," Eleanor said firmly, surprising both her children. "I need to be there. I need to hear him acknowledge what he did, not just to you, but to those other people he hurt. I need closure." The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday at the federal courthouse. Marcus would need to provide a victim impact statement, which he spent considerable time crafting. He wanted to balance accountability with mercy, focusing on the broader implications of Ray's abuse of authority. Over the next few days, local media coverage intensified. The story had captured public attention because it highlighted issues of police accountability and the respect owed to military service members. Editorial pieces appeared in newspapers discussing the importance of civilian-military relations and the dangers of unchecked authority. Ray's former colleagues at the police department were scrambling to distance themselves from him. The department announced a comprehensive review of their oversight procedures and promised reforms to prevent similar incidents. Several officers who had worked closely with Ray were placed under internal investigation. Marcus found himself reluctantly thrust into a public role as an advocate for accountability in law enforcement. Military leadership encouraged him to speak publicly about the incident, viewing it as an opportunity to strengthen civilian-military relations and demonstrate the professionalism of military personnel. "I never wanted to be a public figure," Marcus confided to Jessica as they prepared for the hearing. "I just wanted Ray to treat me with basic respect." "Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we never intended to fight," Jessica replied. "Your courage in standing up to him is going to help other people who have been bullied by authorities." The courthouse was packed on the morning of Ray's sentencing hearing. Media representatives, military officials, law enforcement personnel, and members of the public filled every available seat. Marcus wore his dress uniform, a decision made at the request of military leadership to emphasize the serious nature of the offense. Eleanor sat in the front row with Jessica, both women dressed conservatively in black. Eleanor had lost more weight during the stress of recent weeks, but her posture was straight and determined. She needed to witness this conclusion to the 12-year chapter of her life with Ray. When Ray was led into the courtroom in civilian clothes, he looked smaller somehow, diminished without his badge and uniform. His eyes briefly met Eleanor's across the courtroom, and she saw something she'd never seen before: genuine shame and regret. Federal Judge Patricia Coleman called the court to order and reviewed the plea agreement terms. Ray's attorney confirmed his client's acceptance of all conditions, and then Judge Coleman asked Ray to address the court. Ray stood slowly, his voice barely audible as he began to speak. "Your Honor, I want to acknowledge the serious mistakes I made and the harm I caused to Major Williams, my family, and the other individuals who were affected by my misconduct." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "I allowed my position of authority to corrupt my judgment and behavior. I failed to show proper respect for Major Williams' military service and rank. I let my personal insecurities and need for control override my duty as a law enforcement officer." He turned to face Marcus directly. "Major Williams, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what happened that day. For 12 years, I minimized and dismissed your military achievements because they threatened my sense of importance. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Marcus remained impassive, but Alina felt tears streaming down her face as she finally heard Ray acknowledge the truth of his behavior. Ray also addressed the other victims who had come forward, taking responsibility for his pattern of misconduct and abuse of authority. The courtroom was silent except for his voice, as he systematically dismantled the justifications he'd built up over years of problematic behavior. Judge Coleman then called upon Marcus to deliver his victim impact statement. Marcus approached the podium with measured steps, his military bearing evident to everyone present. "Your Honor, the events that brought us here began with a simple failure of respect and escalated due to an abuse of authority that appears to have been systemic rather than isolated." Marcus's victim impact statement was measured and powerful, focusing not on personal grievances, but on the broader implications of Ray's misconduct for military-civilian relations and public trust in law enforcement. "Your Honor, my military service has taken me to combat zones and high-stress situations around the world, but I never expected to be handcuffed and detained while conducting official Pentagon business in my own family's backyard by someone who was supposed to be a trusted member of law enforcement." He continued, addressing the impact on his family. "Detective Hoffman's behavior affected not only me, but also my mother, who was placed in an impossible position between her husband and her son. She was forced to witness the systematic diminishment of her son's military service and achievements over a 12-year period." Marcus turned slightly to address Ray directly. "The damage extends beyond personal relationships. When law enforcement officers abuse their authority, particularly against military personnel, it undermines the mutual respect that's essential for our communities to function properly." "However," Marcus continued, "I want to acknowledge Detective Hoffman's acceptance of responsibility today. His willingness to admit his mistakes and accept consequences demonstrates that accountability is possible, even when it's difficult." Judge Coleman thanked Marcus for his statement and then proceeded to formally sentence Ray according to the plea agreement terms. The penalties were substantial: immediate termination from law enforcement, permanent prohibition from carrying firearms, 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and substantial fines. Detective Hoffman, Judge Coleman addressed Ray directly. Your actions represent a serious breach of the public trust placed in law enforcement officers. The fact that you targeted a military officer during the execution of his official duties makes your misconduct particularly egregious. She continued, however, your acceptance of responsibility and willingness to make amends weighs in your favor. I hope you will use this experience to become a better person and to understand the importance of respecting others, regardless of their profession or status. After the formal sentencing concluded, Ray was processed for his probation requirements and released. As he left the courthouse, he was met by a crowd of reporters, but his attorney quickly escorted him to a waiting car without comment. Marcus was also approached by media representatives, but he had prepared a brief statement that emphasized healing and moving forward rather than dwelling on the conflict. I'm grateful that justice has been served and that Detective Hoffman has taken responsibility for his actions. My focus now is on supporting my mother's recovery and continuing my military service. I hope this situation will encourage better communication and mutual respect between law enforcement and military personnel. In the weeks following the hearing, life began to normalize for the Williams family, though their relationships had fundamentally changed. Eleanor filed for divorce from Ray, a decision she'd reached during the long nights of reflection about their marriage. I realized I'd been living with someone I didn't really know, she told Marcus and Jessica over dinner at her new apartment. The man I married wouldn't have handcuffed my son during a Pentagon call. That Ray was a fiction he maintained to keep me happy. Eleanor's cancer treatment was progressing well, and her oncologist noted that her stress levels had decreased significantly since the resolution of the legal proceedings. The emotional burden of living with Ray's controlling behavior had been affecting her health more than anyone had realized. Marcus returned to his duties at the Pentagon, where the incident had actually enhanced his reputation among colleagues and superiors. His handling of an extremely difficult personal situation while maintaining operational security and military bearing had impressed senior leadership. Major Williams, General Hayes told him during a private meeting, "Your conduct during this entire situation exemplifies the professionalism we expect from our officers. You've turned a personal attack into a teaching moment about dignity and accountability." Marcus was promoted to lieutenant colonel 6 months later, an advancement that his family could finally celebrate openly. Eleanor hosted a small party, inviting neighbors who had witnessed the federal agent's arrival and now understood the full context of what they'd seen. Jessica had moved closer to home to help support their mother, taking a job in Washington, D.C. that allowed her to visit regularly. The three family members had grown closer through the crisis, finally able to communicate honestly without Ray's manipulative influence. Ray, meanwhile, was struggling to rebuild his life after losing his career and reputation. The community that had once respected him as a law enforcement officer now viewed him as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. He completed his community service at a veterans support center, an assignment that Judge Coleman had specifically chosen to help him understand the value of military service. Working with disabled veterans and learning about their sacrifices gave Ray a perspective he'd lacked during his years of dismissing Marcus's achievements. Eleanor received occasional updates about Ray's situation through mutual acquaintances, but she had moved forward with her life. The divorce was finalized without contest, and she was rediscovering interests and friendships that had been suppressed during their marriage. 2 years after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his Pentagon office. Ray's probation officer called to request a meeting, explaining that Ray had asked to speak with Marcus as part of his rehabilitation process. Marcus was initially reluctant, but after discussing it with his family and military counselor, he agreed to a supervised meeting at the probation office. Ray looked older and more worn than Marcus remembered, his former arrogance replaced by genuine humility. "Marcus, I asked for this meeting because I need you to know that my apology in court was just the beginning of understanding what I did wrong," Ray began, his voice steady but subdued. "Working with veterans over the past 2 years has shown me the real value of military service and the sacrifices people like you make." Ray continued, explaining how his community service had opened his eyes to the reality of military life and the challenges faced by service members and their families. "I spent 12 years trying to diminish your achievements because I was threatened by them. I was wrong, and I want you to know that I finally understand what I put you and your mother through." Marcus listened without interrupting, evaluating Ray's sincerity. The man before him seemed genuinely changed, stripped of the defensive arrogance that had characterized their previous interactions. "Ray, I appreciate you taking responsibility and working to understand the impact of your actions," Marcus replied carefully. "The most important thing is that you continue supporting veterans through your community service, and that you never use authority to intimidate people again." Ray nodded emphatically. "That's exactly what I intend to do. I'll never work in law enforcement again, but I want to use the rest of my life to make amends for the damage I caused. The meeting concluded with a cautious but genuine reconciliation. Marcus didn't trust Ray completely, but he recognized the signs of genuine remorse and personal growth. Ray would never be part of the Williams family again, but he was no longer an enemy. Marcus returned home that evening to find Alina and Jessica preparing dinner together, their laughter filling the kitchen. His mother looked healthier than she had in years, her cancer in remission and her spirit renewed by freedom from Ray's controlling influence. "How did the meeting go?" Alina asked, her concern evident but not overwhelming. "He's changed," Marcus said simply. "I think the experience actually taught him something important about respect and accountability." The Williams family had emerged stronger from their ordeal, with deeper appreciation for each other and clearer understanding of Marcus's military service and achievements. Alina now proudly displayed Marcus's commendations and spoke openly about his Pentagon work to anyone who would listen. Most importantly, they had learned that standing up to abuse of authority, even when it's difficult and personal, can create positive change that extends far beyond the immediate situation.